everyone. Sorry we're a few minutes late. As as much as we love technology, sometimes technology isn't our best friend, but it's lovely to be with you this morning for me here in Western Australia, but probably good evening to you wherever you are to be part of this. I'm just going to try and make my slides show. Okay, I thought that we could just jump in and that the slides would automatically come up, but it doesn't look like they are going to do what we want. Oh, there they are. Magic. Don't we just love technology? So last week I jumped onto Facebook, and some of you may have been there. We talked a little bit more about a nutritional approach to lipedema and lymphedema. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about sort of what our expectations may be when we start keto, what other things we might need to think about, and really sort of, I guess, unpack a little bit about how we need to personalize this to us. So it's lovely to be with you. Hi, Sue from Florida. It's lovely to have you. I can see a few other names here. Let's get started and we can talk about this. And then at the end, if you have any questions, please post them in the chat as we go through, but I'll circle back around to any of those questions later in the presentation. So Wilma's saying hi from Shetland. Is that in the UK? I think of Shetland and I think of Shetland pony. So I could be totally wrong, but lovely to have anyone here that's listening to this live, and then of course anyone that may listen to it later on. So for those of you that don't know me, I am a university qualified nutritionist. I live a low carb ketogenic lifestyle myself. I have lots of experience in helping people navigate the sort of the nuances of this. My training is more in a holistic or I guess a functional nutrition approach. So anything that I talk about today will be looked at through that lens, that we are whole beings. We're not just lipedema, we're not just lymphedema. We are whole beings that have all sorts of different things going on with our biochemistry. And what we want to be doing is looking at any sort of nutritional or lifestyle interventions that can help support our whole being. I've been involved here with Lipedema Simplified. It must be coming up to 2 years. I feel so comfortable here in this community. I think we are all working for a common purpose, which is to understand more about what's going on that's contributing to things like lipedema, and working from a grassroots level to try and find all of the strategies that may have some benefit with this, and then knowing how to personalize this to which ones of all of those strategies are the right ones for me. So I can see a few more people have jumped on. Sacramento, hi Kim. Wow, it's lovely to be part of, like I said, this community, but to see that we're like a worldwide community of people that are experiencing a health condition that in many ways has been left behind in terms of the amount of research that's been involved with this. And I really hope that, like I mentioned before, from a grassroots level, that we can, continue to move the research into this forward so that we can have strategies not only for us, but for our daughters, for our granddaughters, for our sisters, for our cousins, because we know that there's a genetic component to this, that anything that we learn and contribute to the understanding of lipedema is going to have benefit multi-generationally. And that's where my passion for this condition comes from, because it runs so very strongly in my family tree. So let's get started. Here at Lipedema Simplified, we do favor a ketogenic intervention because we see the most improvements with this particular way of eating. Some of those come from improved energy levels, less cravings, especially for things like sugar, which is so prevalent, of course, in our food supply. For many of us, it enables to move beyond that, that diet hamster wheel that many of us have been on. One of the things I hear so regularly from ladies in our community is, I've spent 20, 30, 40 years dieting and following all of the recommendations that their doctors may tell them. Go home exercise more, eat less. That's the only way you're going to lose weight. And that keeps us on this vicious cycle of eating less, cravings build up, we potentially, ditch the diet, we go back to eating what we were, the weight comes back, we, start to feel a bit negative about ourselves. So we step into the next dietary intervention that's been touted in a magazine or by somebody at work or something else. And we just continually go around this. What I find time and time again is that by moving to a ketogenic way of eating, and you'll hear me not necessarily refer to it as a diet, but a ketogenic, certainly a low carb way of eating, it allows us to enjoy food more without all of that pressure of I'm on a diet. It really is just shifting the way that we look at food, the components of the food that we're eating, and it makes us less hungry, less cravings, more energetic, all of these sorts of things. Not necessarily immediately do people see a change on the scales, but they certainly tell me that within a week or two, their clothes feel more comfortable. And that often is a measure. When there's some underlying lipedema, then, the number on the scales can be quite misleading. But, as we're feeling more comfortable in our clothes, that to me is a real positive. There's likely to be less inflammation, which leads to less pain and swelling. And all of this, I think, leads to a greater sense of hope ongoingly, that we can have some strategies that can make a difference, that we feel more comfortable in our own skin and we don't have to deal with all of the pain and discomfort that often come along with conditions like lipedema. So last week, I talked a lot about what I see as being this vicious cycle of lipedema growth. We have inflammation, we have hormonal imbalances, dysregulation of insulin. Even without diabetes, there's some underlying insulin kind of, ups and downs that can contribute to some other issues. That, of course, plays into overall blood sugar balance. But interestingly, many ladies with lipedema that have some blood sugar issues don't necessarily end up with diabetes. And I imagine that was one of the things that Leslyn spoke about today in her presentation, about how potentially in the past lipedema has actually been protective, and it's been I think she referred to it as the mother gene, that our bodies naturally say, well, if you're eating excess sugar or excess carbohydrates, we're going to store it in your hips and your thighs because that's more protective than storing it around your middle where it's around your vital organs. So I'm going to leave Leslyn to talk about that because she's an expert, but we do typically only see diabetes in later stages. And so, all of these things are important to understand. But here we have this vicious cycle of the inflammation leading to more immune system issues that contribute to more fibrosis in around those fat cells. When there's a lot of fibrosis, that then invites more white blood cell macrophages and other sorts of immune munch and crunches that come in. They create collateral damage. Potentially, they're not clearing away all that debris. It leads to more inflammation that calls in more of these immune system molecules. And so we end up with this vicious cycle. But what we see is that in a number of different places in this cycle, a ketogenic intervention or a ketogenic way of eating can actually help to break that cycle. But it's important when somebody's moving towards testing out a low carb way of eating that they recognize that despite the fact that we want to see those changes on the scales, like I mentioned before, weight loss isn't linear. And some people can get discouraged in the early weeks that, I read online that somebody else lost, 5 kilos, 10 pounds in 2 weeks. I've lost 0.5 of a pound. What's going on? Maybe this doesn't work for me. I think we have to recognize here that as our body's trying to get healthy, it's doing some fundamental things in the background. And we may end up in the first few weeks, we may get a significant water shift that does look like a nice, change on the scales. But it can then plateau out for a few weeks as our body does some underlying sort of healing work in the background. And then it kind of just goes along in fits and starts. And I think we need to recognize that it's important to be patient with this process and allow our body to do some of this healing in the background. I think the other challenge with starting some sort of new eating regime is that there is no one size fits all. And we're also biochemically unique. And in functional nutrition, functional medicine terms, we refer to this as bio-individuality. We all come to this with different drivers that have contributed to it. We all have different environmental exposures, different genetics, different gut health, all sorts of different things. So we have to recognize that, it is about ultimately tweaking this to make it work as well as it can for each of us individually based on what else is going on. So like I mentioned, our genetics plays a role. The environment where we live, what's the air quality like? What exposures, if we live in a rural area, we're being exposed to pesticides and all sorts of other things. I think we need to always consider our current state of health. I know for me, I have an underlying autoimmune thyroid condition that compounds some of the other health complications I have. So, this is where we need to start looking sort of bigger picture and saying what else is going on. It's not typically just lipedema. There's usually some other things, and we need to think about that. And then this last one down here in the bottom right corner, our stress load. Often we kind of think, stress is something that's just there, but it is a huge driver in a lot of the underlying biochemistry that goes on in our body. Stress triggers things like adrenaline, noradrenaline, cortisol. It can upset the balance of things like blood sugar if we're very stressed. So we need to be mindful of this too. Like I just mentioned, keto is often promoted as a one-size-fits-all approach, and you'll read that online. Like if everyone could just follow this exact formula, then all will be well. But I think it's really important that we recognize this bio-individuality. And there are certainly times where, someone will come to me and say, yes, I have lipedema, help me, with a ketogenic way of eating. And I've had to say, well, let's look at what else is going on. Maybe keto isn't your first step. Maybe it's your second or third. Maybe we need to get some of these other underlying factors under control first. But we can only really know that when we have that conversation and try and work out specifically what the right path is for each particular person. The other challenge one of the other challenges that I often come across when I'm talking to people is the longer that we have dieted in the past, the harder it can be for our body to be willing to let go of any of that weight that's stored in those fat cells. And like I mentioned, a few moments ago, many of us come to this with a long history of dieting or, in some sort of way, restrictive eating, whether that's too few calories or, particular types of foods that we've not been eating for particular reasons. And, sometimes we need to just help the body to feel safe first so that it will actually let go of some of that weight. And I know this probably seems a little bit like an airy-fairy kind of concept, but we do need to think about it in terms of if we have a long history of dieting, it may take a little bit longer. It doesn't mean it's not going to happen, but it just means that we need to be a little bit more patient to allow some of these underlying potential nutrient insufficiencies, nutrient imbalances to kind of be rectified so that our body feels safe enough to release this weight. Another challenge is getting into ketosis can happen fairly quickly. For many of us, we naturally go into a mild state of ketosis just overnight between dinner and breakfast. So after a couple of days of dramatically lowering our carbohydrate intake, we can get into a state of ketosis. Ketosis just means I have no more glucose to burn, so I'm now going to start burning fat for fuel rather than sugar for fuel. And that can happen fairly quickly. Like I said, for some, it even happens overnight. But what we do need to consider is ketosis is one place in this journey, but becoming what we would call fat adapted, that's another, and it doesn't happen so quickly. So typically the trajectory of when we move into a ketogenic way of eating, within a couple of days, we can be in a state of ketosis. That then can trigger a whole load of what we call keto flu or uncomfortable symptoms. As our body's trying to adapt from one way of doing things to another, it can feel uncomfortable. And this is, we talk a lot when I work one-on-one with clients or in our small group coaching for, keto for lipedema, we talk a lot about the importance of electrolytes to keep that kind of under control. Becoming fat adapted, where our body naturally prefers to burn fat for fuel rather than glucose for fuel, that can take anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks for people. And I think this comes back to the history that we have, and some of these underlying conditions impacts how long that takes. So whilst I say to people, give this a go, give it 4 to 6 weeks, test out how you particularly feel doing this. It can take longer than that for this to become more of a natural, comfortable way of doing things. And so I guess I would say don't give up too soon. Again, this probably is really just one more recommendation that we need patience with this, and we do need to think a little bit more long-term rather than that short-term, let's do this for a few weeks, see if it works, and then go back to what we were doing previously. Again, patience. And I'll acknowledge right from the outset, it's very hard when we're intervening in some particular way to be patient. I don't know how you feel, but, we want to start seeing results fairly quickly. I can see some of the names on the call here, people that I have met in the past that have maybe been part of the small group coaching or have certainly years of experience of eating in a ketogenic way. I'd love to hear just quickly in the comments about your experiences and how long it took for you to feel really comfortable in this way of eating, and how you navigated the patience piece. I'm not naturally a patient person, so I'm just curious about other people's experience. So how do we know we need to start tweaking things, or when we've stalled or plateaued in our weight loss goals because of food choices and other factors? And this is a question I often get asked, and hopefully we can sort of unpack this a little bit. When there are underlying food intolerances, you will often see a weight loss trajectory that looks like this. So this is from one of my nutrition colleagues. She was tracking this. I think this may have been in Chronometer, but I don't quote me on that. She started a dietary intervention just after Christmas. And so you can see here, it was December the 27th. She was tracking along, and naturally, our weight does this. You only have to have drunk a little bit more water, and your weight's going to change a little bit. But can you see these 3 spikes? These are when she had dairy. This one, I think she said it was a keto cheesecake, but it was a cheesecake nonetheless. For her, this was a really interesting way of being able to track and see how her body was responding to certain foods. She did find a lot more weight loss success once she removed dairy from her eating regime. And yet dairy, especially cream cheese, sour cream, these sorts of things are actually quite prevalent in a typical ketogenic way of eating. And so this is where, when we can start to notice that we get these spikes in that, what that would mean is when you jump on the scales, you've actually put on a couple of pounds or kilos overnight, and yet you haven't eaten a whole lot more. It's just you've eaten something that's different. So just be mindful of this, and this can be a helpful way of checking to see what's going on in the background. It's also very easy once we kind of get into keto to have what we call either carb creep or fat creep. I know this is something that I have struggled with over and over, that once I become quite comfortable with my eating regime, I'm like, oh, just a little bit of this, or, a handful of that. I don't specifically track using an app. I talk a lot to people about quantities, because I think that so many of us coming from that diet mindset just don't want to feel like we're tracking things like in the past we've tracked calories. There's a lot of different ways. In our small group coaching, we do talk a little bit more about, is tracking right for you? Isn't it right for you? I sort of talk to people about intermittent tracking, track for a day here and a day there, just to see where you're at without feeling like you need to track every morsel that you put in your mouth every day for the rest of your life. I think that would, to me, feel a little bit discouraging, because once we get into a habit and know the sorts of foods that are serving us, ultimately we want to just be able to almost rinse and repeat, that we know what we're doing, we know what feels good, and we can go from there. I'm seeing more people joining the call. Gosh, we really are an international group. Ohio, Georgia, Virginia. Hey, lovely to have so many of you here. And hi, Lisa. Lovely to have you with us too. I often talk to people too, if people aren't having the weight loss success that they would like, or even that change in shape that they've been hoping for, I do think it's important that we consider where there's any underlying metabolic dysregulation. There can be very commonly sluggish thyroid function. And then cellular hypothyroidism is, I guess the best way to explain that is where everything about your thyroid looks perfect on paper when you have your TSH and other markers checked, but maybe at a cellular level, there's some resistance to that. In some ways, and this isn't technically where the medical field would tell you it is, but I think about it in terms of we can become insulin resistant, where our cells just sort of put up their hands, put them over their ears and say, I'm not listening to insulin. I think in some ways we can become a little bit thyroid hormone deaf as well. And so our cells, whilst we may have good levels of thyroid hormone in our blood, they're not actually getting into the cells and doing what they need to. And the way to combat this is to try and work out what's going on in the background. And sometimes we do need to tweak a low carb ketogenic way of eating just to keep that thyroid humming along. If there is some underlying thyroid dysregulation, then eating keto can over time cause a little bit of compromise in the background. So for people that this is an issue for, we do need to navigate this. It's certainly, I guess, a valid point that we could be actually eating too little. For somebody that year after year after year is told by their medical professionals, eat less, exercise more. Often we can't exercise more because of our mobility issues and because of the pain that causes, but we can certainly be eating less. And as we eat less, because that's been the prevailing recommendation, our metabolism actually slows down to match our food intake. So I often hear this from people that they'll say to me, if I eat over 1,000 calories a day, I will put on weight very rapidly. And there is no logic to that. If we were thinking about calories in, calories out, it would make sense that the less calories we eat, the more likely we are to lose weight. But I often find that if people have a very long history of dieting, that they have just reduced their calories, reduced them. And so their metabolism is slowed, they don't have as much energy. And every time they just slightly deviate from that lower calorie intake, all of a sudden, boom, they'll put on a couple of pounds. And the way that we need to navigate this is actually to encourage people to eat more. But we're not going to do that, like doubling your food intake overnight. We would need to take baby steps to do this, to get somebody's metabolism back up to speed. Obviously, the amount of calories that each of us requires would vary depending on height, weight, all sorts of other factors. But typically, if somebody says to me, I'm eating, 1,000 calories, 800 calories, even 1,200 calories, I would be saying that's not likely enough to keep your metabolism humming along well. And we do need to slowly build that up, whether it's just adding another 50 carbs each week and allowing the body to get back into some sort of rhythm. It also could be a matter of, it's time to bring in some other practices. It may be that eating less frequently can be helpful. You've probably heard things like intermittent fasting, 5-2 fasting, longer term multi-day fasting. This probably flies a little bit in the face of what I said in the previous slide about not eating enough. But, for some people, they do need to kind of give the whole process a little bit of a kick with some modified fasting practices just to kind of get things moving again. And all of these strategies that I'm talking about are just things that we need to be thinking about, and that there is just no one size fits all, do this for the rest of your life with low carb or keto. We do need to keep thinking about what may have changed, what do I need to do next, what's my very next step. And sometimes just naturally people tell me, now I don't wake up hungry in the morning. I eat my first meal at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. These are some of those sorts of fasting practices that can be helpful without dramatically lowering the level of calories that someone's eating, because they're just focusing on eating some of those calories at different times of the day. I think stress can also be a huge piece in this. If someone comes to me and they say, I've just lost my job, or I've just had to move house, or my kids are going away to college, or whatever it may be. These are stresses. We can have stresses that are external, like psychological. We can have physiological stresses in our body, and that compounded levels of both psychological and physiological stress can certainly impact our weight loss goals too. And we do talk a little bit in our small group coaching about the role that stress plays, because we can be doing all sorts of things as well as we possibly can in terms of our food choices, but we're still highly strung out by life, and this is going to make weight loss just that little bit harder. So these are some of the challenges that I typically recognize in people's navigation into keto, and certainly along their journey as well. And whether you're new to keto, whether you've been doing this for some time, I think it's always helpful to navigate this with this mindset of, I'm going to stop, pause, regroup, think about, is it working for me right now? What else may be going on? Do I need to tweak around the edges of this? And so, today, this Facebook Live is an opportunity really just for you to sort of pause a little bit and think, is what I'm doing working? What may my very next step be? And I think this is one of the important things about Lipedema Simplified, is that we have lots of supportive strategies going on and lots of offerings that can really help you to navigate this journey wherever you are in that journey. As a nutrition coach, I do one-on-one coaching with people, and often I'll have ladies with lipedema come to me and say, I've been doing this for all of this time. This is what I've found is beneficial. What do I do next? And certainly there's some options for one-on-one coaching to just see where your very next step is, maybe to have a look over some pathology, work out what might be at play and what you could do next. But one of the things that we've introduced this year, and it's been so wonderful, is we're calling it our small group coaching. And this is where we have up to six people in a small group, where we just try and navigate this together. I know many people are finding, financially things are a pinch these days, after the COVID pandemic, economically. Here in Australia, we have incredibly high interest rates and all sorts of things going on. The economy's not so wonderful. And so we put our heads together and said, how can we make some of this personalized coaching more cost effective for people, more available? And we came up with this small group coaching option where over a course of 3 weeks, we meet twice a week as a small group. So there's lots of, getting to know each other personally. It creates a nice little support group around us, where we've got not just the coach, but other people in our group that we can bounce ideas off. People share their recipes, they share their successes, they share their concerns. And it's just a wonderful way to learn from each other and really try and navigate either stepping into a ketogenic way of eating, a trial of that, or tweaking whatever you're doing right now and seeing where the next step may be for you. I always suggest to people that when they're navigating a trial of ketogenic eating, that they assess all the way along. Have a sense of curiosity about how you're feeling, what may be going on for you. And one of the great things about keto is because it's naturally inflammation lowering in the body, we often get to a place where we just feel that bit more comfortable in our own skin. And so then if we do kind of deviate a little bit outside of the recommendations that we provide, then you have that as a barometer. If you say to me, I went out to a birthday, I didn't know what to eat, so I had a few, French fries, and I had whatever was on my plate. But gosh, today I feel uncomfortable. I feel like I'm in pain. I'm inflamed. I say to people, don't do that again. I say, this is really good information. What have you learnt from this? What have you discovered about you that you may be able to get away with 2 or 3 French fries in a pinch, but once you go beyond 5, then it really is inflaming for you. And I'm just giving this as an example. Don't think that I'm saying go out and eat French fries. We do in the small group coaching talk a lot about what can we swap these things out for. so that we don't have this scenario where we're like, oh, I just want to eat whatever's on, on the plates in front of me, that we do have some other alternatives. And so again, that's one of the wonderful things about small group coaching is people say to me, how do I navigate this, or how do I do that? We can all put our heads together and come up with a whole list of ideas for people about some ways that we can, and some strategies that we can use. So finding your own personal barometer is a really helpful way of, long-term being able to recognize what particularly is causing inflammation for you and how you can navigate around this. I remember a funny story where I had a client say to me, if I deviate sort of outside of what I know works for me, my elbow, I'm just in pain in my elbow. And so we would joke about that's her weather vane, that's her barometer, but each of us have them. For me, I get a lot of pain in my back, in my spine, and that tells me that I've deviated a little bit far. It's a good way of being able to kind of, help myself move backwards. So I'd also love to hear if anyone has any stories, anyone's worked out where their barometer is, and when that's been helpful in terms of being able to, return back to the things that works for you. So just to give you a little bit more information about the small group coaching, because we do have our next small group coaching kicking off Sunday night in the US. That will be Monday morning for those of us here in my time zone here in Australia. It's a small group of up to 6 people. We have 3 1-hour live group coaching sessions. That's where we sort of go into the nuts and bolts of how to navigate a ketogenic way of eating. We have 3 1-hour live Q&As. Often we end up sort of talking about particular strategies that have come up in the live coaching sessions, and then we can kind of personalize this. The wonderful thing about just 6 people that are at different stages in their lipedema journey is that we can actually tailor the content. And so there is no 2 small groups that look the same. It is very much personalized to the group that's there. You'll have access to a private Facebook group, and you'll be able to have access to the recordings too. Sometimes people have said, I can come to one of the sessions but not the other, and that's just fine. It's really, we're doing this as a group. You can listen onto the recordings later, but we can have those real-time conversations in the Facebook group as well. In terms of the cost, for 6 hours support plus the private Facebook group, it's actually less than the cost of what 2 individual coaching sessions would be. So it's a really wonderful way to step into a ketogenic experience, see how your particular body responds, and along with the coaching, you get handouts, recipes, based on the needs of the group. I might send checklists, or I might send different, information about assessing different things. And that's what I mean by it's all very much personalized to the group. Now, we already have 4 registered for this Sunday night's group to kick off. So if anyone's interested, there's just 2 places left in this group. If you do want to give this a go, I would love to be involved with you. I'll be coaching this particular group. It's a great way of really testing out how this goes. Or, like I said, if you've already started, tweaking it. There are so many different, what I would say is experts online about keto, but there are some very subtle nuances that are necessary in terms of navigating keto for lipedema that we need to be mindful of. And not all experts are experts in lipedema, as you ladies are. And as a coach, I'm very well aware of those nuances that we need to be mindful of. So there we go. That's really my conversation around where we're at with keto for lipedema, what we may expect in terms of that trajectory of a ketogenic intervention for lipedema. And then please, we've got a few more minutes today. I'd love to answer any questions. I can see Dana's asking, is it over Zoom? No, definitely over Zoom. It is a private group where we join together. Typically, the sessions are 6 p.m. Eastern Sunday night in the US, and then Thursday night in the US, which would be Friday morning here on the, those of us that are down under, and Monday morning. So again, it's about navigating that time slot. I did mention that They are recorded, so even if you can't make it live, you can certainly listen in and ask away your questions in the Facebook group. So any questions? I'm just going to scroll back. I didn't see any particular ones. I saw lots of highs. So again, thank you for hanging in there with us today as we've talked about some of the challenges that do come with a ketogenic intervention, but hopefully I've also given you some strategies that you can take away right from today in terms of testing this out for you. And we'd also love it if you are interested in joining our small group coaching or even some of our one-on-one coaching options through Lipedema Simplified. I just saw someone say that they're here from Chorley in the UK. That is very familiar to me. My son lived around that Manchester kind of area for a couple of years, and I think Chorley is one of the names that I heard, but I could be totally wrong. It just sounds very familiar. So Linda, maybe you can correct me if you're still on the call. What else? Any other questions that we may have based on keto or nutritional interventions for lipedema? I'm more than happy to hang about for a few minutes and answer your question. So Christine's asking, what is different between a ketogenic intervention and a Mediterranean diet? Well, I would actually call a ketogenic intervention in some ways a modified Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean diet is very much about plenty of, eating the plants, eating a healthy array of protein, particularly from seafood, not necessarily from red meat, but more from the other sorts of poultry or pork or some of these other ones. A Mediterranean diet would typically contain healthy fats in terms of extra virgin olive oil, some dairy in there, cheeses, these sorts of things. It would also then include all of your legumes and pulses. So that would be typically what a Mediterranean diet would look like. If we were modifying that, I would say the key principles out of this are, fiber from plants, protein, healthy fats. If we can skip the grains and the legumes and pulses, it actually looks very similar to keto, except that with keto, we are probably focusing more on the protein and the healthy fats, but not necessarily having quite as many plants as maybe we would have had in a Mediterranean diet. And this is where over time, I always say to people, we work out what the best intervention is. And then as we're tweaking it, some people can tolerate more fiber from plants than other people and still have positive benefits from this. So that's where we start playing around with it too. Dana's just said, I can see it Sundays at 6 p.m. Could not keep up with the notes with 2 thumbs. So yes, both on the, Dana, you're saying Thursday. Okay, let me just go back. So it is in Eastern Standard Time in the US. It will be 6 p.m. Sunday evening, 6 p.m. Thursday evening. And then I mentioned that then makes it Friday and Monday for us down under. And that's where it starts to blow our minds, doesn't it? The whole time difference. So if you just think about it in terms of it's 6 p.m. Sunday night, 6 p.m. Thursday night, hopefully that works. And Dana, I'd love to have you as part of the group. So please use the link that was shared a little bit earlier. There you go. Someone magic in the background has just put it back up here. Please join us. It's really a wonderful way of getting that support and that intervention, in a group of people that are trying to do it at the same time. I often think about that slide that I showed before. Hang on, let me just take it back a step. I really love this particular one where it's, everyone's supporting one another. And I think there's some real magic that comes from being part of something bigger than just ourselves, that we're doing this together, that we have other people that are going through it at the same time so that we can sort of bounce ideas around and that we can feel really nicely supported. So it'll be wonderful to have you as part of it. Any further questions? Otherwise, we might leave it here for today. But you will see me pop up in Lipedema Simplified things from time to time. And it's really lovely for me to see some familiar names as comments have popped through. It's I feel very close to this community, and I know that Catherine Sayo and the others that are part of Lipedema Simplified feel so strongly that we are we are a community, and we are here as we're supporting one another. And that's the amazing way that we're going to find all of the solutions that we need to for lipedema, because we are a community of like-minded people all looking for the same sort of answers. So thank you for being here. I can't see any more questions coming through, but like I said, I do pop around this group from time to time. So I hope to catch up with you in any sort of way that we possibly can. Take care and enjoy the rest of your evening, or for me, it's just the beginning of my day. So take care, everyone. Thank you.